The airport was packed with people that Tuesday morning. Everyone seemed to be in a hurry. Some ran with their bags. Others stood in long lines looking at their watches every few seconds. The announcement board showed that many flights were delayed. People groaned and complained. It was going to be one of those days. Flight 237 to Atlanta was already 30 minutes late. The gate area was crowded with tired passengers. Some sat on the floor because all the seats were taken. Children cried. Business people talked loudly on their phones. A group of college students laughed and took pictures together. The air smelled like coffee and fast food from the nearby restaurants. Finally, the gate agent made an announcement. Boarding would begin soon. People jumped up and formed a line, even though their boarding group had not been called yet. Everyone wanted to get on the plane first to find space for their bags. A tall man in a dark blue suit walked quietly to the side. He was not rushing like the others. He looked calm and patient. His suit was perfectly fitted and looked expensive. His shoes were polished and shiny. He carried a brown leather briefcase that looked well made. Despite his fancy clothes, he did not act superior or proud. He smiled at people around him and stepped aside when others pushed past him. When his boarding group was called, he walked to the gate agent. She scanned his ticket and smiled. He thanked her politely and walked down the jet bridge. The tunnel leading to the plane was hot and stuffy. He could hear the noise of the plane engines outside. Inside the plane, it was chaos. The aisle was completely blocked with people. Some struggled to lift their heavy bags into the overhead bins. Others stood waiting, unable to move forward. A few passengers got angry when they could not find space for their luggage. The flight attendants tried to help, but there were too many people and too many bags. The man in the blue suit found his seat. It was 12A, a window seat in the economy section. Some people might have expected a man dressed so well to be sitting in first class, but he did not seem to care where he sat. He waited patiently for the people in front of him to move. When an older woman struggled with her heavy bag, he stepped forward. "May I help you with that?" he asked kindly. The woman looked relieved. "Oh, thank you so much. My arms are not as strong as they used to be." He lifted her bag easily and placed it in the overhead bin. The woman thanked him several times. He smiled and told her it was no problem at all. Then he moved to his own seat and sat down by the window. He placed his briefcase under the seat in front of him. Then he pulled out his phone. His screen showed dozens of unread emails. He began scrolling through them, his face serious and focused. Whatever he did for work, it seemed important. But he did not talk loudly about it like some other business people on the plane. Up in the front galley, a flight attendant named Karen was having a terrible morning. Everything had gone wrong from the moment she woke up. First, her alarm did not go off, so she woke up late. Then she spilled hot coffee on her uniform while driving to the airport. The stain was right on the front of her shirt. She tried to clean it, but it only got worse. When she arrived at work, her supervisor told her the flight was already delayed. Passengers would be angry and difficult. Karen felt her stress level rising. Then, right before boarding started, her teenage daughter called her crying. There was some drama at school. Karen wanted to help, but she had to work. She told her daughter they would talk later and hung up the phone feeling guilty. Karen was 47 years old. She had been a flight attendant for 22 years. When she first started, she loved the job. She enjoyed traveling and meeting new people. But after so many years, the job had become exhausting. Passengers seemed ruder than before. The company kept adding more responsibilities, but not more pay. Her feet hurt all the time. Her back ached from lifting heavy bags. Today, she just wanted to get through the flight without any problems. But she could already tell it was not going to be an easy day. The plane was completely full. There were families with small children. There were business travelers who would demand things constantly. There were budget travelers who would complain about everything. As passengers continued to board, the noise level in the cabin grew louder and louder. A baby started crying in the back. A man in first class was already complaining about the delay. Two passengers got into an argument over an overhead bin. Karen felt a headache forming behind her eyes. She took a deep breath and tried to calm herself. Just get through this flight, she thought. Just a few hours and then she could go home. She picked up the intercom to make an announcement, but her hand was shaking slightly from stress and too much coffee. In seat 12A, the man in the blue suit continued working on his phone. He responded to important emails. He checked some financial reports. He made a few notes about an upcoming meeting. His phone showed he was connected to some very important people. There were messages from CEOs, politicians, and famous business leaders. But no one on the plane knew who he was. He liked it that way. He preferred to blend in when he traveled. Flying in economy class helped him stay connected to regular people. It reminded him of where he came from. He had not always been successful. He had not always worn expensive suits or carried leather briefcases. He remembered struggling to buy plane tickets years ago. He remembered what it felt like to be ignored or treated badly because of how he looked. Those memories kept him humble. They also made him sensitive to how people treated each other. He noticed when service workers were disrespected. He noticed when people made assumptions based on appearances. He had experienced it himself many times throughout his life. The boarding process continued slowly. More and more people squeezed into the plane. The overhead bins were getting full. Some passengers had to check their bags at the last minute. This made them angry because they would have to wait at baggage claim later. The flight attendants tried to help everyone, but tensions were rising. Karen walked up and down the aisle, checking seatbelts and closing overhead bins. Her fake smile was starting to fade. She was hot and tired. Her feet hurt in her work shoes. She just wanted everyone to sit down and be quiet so they could take off. The man in 12A had finished his emails. He put his phone in airplane mode and looked out the window. The morning sun was bright. He could see luggage carts and fuel trucks moving around on the tarmac. He thought about the important meeting waiting for him in Atlanta, but he also thought about taking a short nap during the flight. It had been a long week. He had no idea that in just a few minutes his quiet morning flight would turn into something completely different. He had no idea that he was about to become the center of attention for all the wrong reasons. He had no idea that the stressed flight attendant walking up and down the aisle would soon change the course of his entire day. The plane was almost fully boarded now. Just a few more passengers were finding their seats. The atmosphere was tense and uncomfortable. Everyone seemed irritated and impatient. The perfect storm was building and no one saw it coming. The last few passengers were finally getting on the plane. An elderly couple walked slowly down the aisle. The husband used a cane. His wife held his arm to steady him. They moved carefully, afraid of falling in the narrow space. Behind them, an impatient businessman in an expensive suit kept sighing loudly. He checked his watch several times and rolled his eyes. The elderly woman stopped at row 12. Her seat was 12B, right next to the man in the blue suit. She smiled at him kindly. He smiled back and stood up to let her pass. But she was carrying a heavy bag. It was stuffed full and looked like it weighed too much for her. "Let me help you with that," the man said gently. He reached for her bag. "Oh, you are so kind," the woman said. Her voice was shaky with age. "My husband usually helps me, but his back has been hurting. I packed too much as usual." The man lifted her bag with ease. It was heavier than it looked. He turned toward the overhead bin above their row. The bin was almost full, but there was just enough space. He stretched up to slide the bag into place. As he did this, his elbow bumped against something on the wall. He heard a soft ding sound. He had accidentally pressed the call button. The small light above row 12 turned on, signaling that a passenger needed help. The man did not even notice at first. He was focused on helping the elderly woman settle into her seat. "There you go," he said, adjusting the bag so it fit properly. "All set." "Thank you so much, young man," the woman said, sitting down. "Such good manners. Your mother raised you well." He smiled and sat back down in his window seat. The woman's husband was sitting on the other side of her in the aisle seat. The old man nodded his thanks as well. The man in the blue suit pulled out his phone again and went back to his work. Everything seemed fine. But up at the front of the plane, Karen saw the call light turn on for row 12. Her jaw tightened. Another passenger needing something. Another demand on her time. She was already behind schedule checking everyone. The captain would want to push back from the gate soon. And now someone in row 12 needed attention. She marched down the aisle quickly. Her shoes made sharp clicking sounds on the floor. Passengers moved their arms and legs out of her way. She passed through first class, then through the premium economy section. Finally, she reached row 12. The call light was still on above the seat. She looked down at the 3 passengers sitting there. The elderly couple looked content and peaceful. They were holding hands and talking quietly to each other. They did not look like they needed anything. That left the man by the window. Karen's eyes fixed on him. He was looking at his phone, completely unaware that the call light was on. Karen felt her frustration boil over. She decided this man had pressed the button just to play around. Some passengers did that. They pressed buttons without thinking. Or worse, they did it just to bother the flight attendants. After the morning she had been through, Karen was in no mood for games. "Excuse me," she said loudly. Her voice was sharp and angry. "Did you just press that call button?" The man looked up from his phone. He seemed confused. He glanced at the call light above him, which was still glowing. Then he looked back at Karen. "I'm sorry," he said calmly. "It was an accident. I was helping this lady with her bag and my elbow hit the button. I did not mean to." His voice was polite and respectful. He was clearly trying to apologize and explain. But Karen was too angry to hear him properly. She saw his expensive suit. She saw his confidence. She saw a man who looked successful and put together. And something inside her snapped. "I do not have time for games," she said, her voice getting louder. Several passengers in nearby rows turned their heads to look. "We are already delayed. Do you see how busy we are? I do not need passengers playing with call buttons and making my job harder." The man's expression changed slightly. He looked surprised by her tone, but he remained calm. He held up his hands in a peaceful gesture, like he was trying to show he meant no harm. "I truly apologize," he said again. "It was completely accidental. I was just trying to help." "Help?" Karen's voice dripped with sarcasm. "You want to help? Then stay in your seat and stop pressing buttons you do not need to press." The elderly woman next to him spoke up. Her voice was soft but firm. "Young lady, this gentleman was helping me with my bag. He was being very kind. Please do not speak to him that way." Karen barely glanced at the old woman. Her focus stayed locked on the man by the window. Something about him bothered her, though she could not quite name what it was. Maybe it was his calm demeanor. Maybe it was his expensive clothes. Maybe it was something deeper that she did not want to admit to herself. "Ma'am, I appreciate you trying to help," Karen said to the elderly woman without looking at her. "But I need to handle this situation with this passenger." "There is no situation," the man said quietly. His voice was still calm, but there was a slight edge to it now. "I pressed the button by accident while helping another passenger. I apologized. I'm not sure what else you want me to do." By now, more passengers were watching. The plane was fully boarded, and there was nothing else to do but watch the drama unfolding in row 12. Some people pulled out their phones, though they kept them low and tried to be discreet. Others whispered to the people sitting next to them. A man across the aisle leaned over to his wife. "This is crazy," he whispered. "That guy did not do anything wrong. Why is she going after him like that?" His wife shook her head. "I do not know, but this is not right. She needs to leave him alone." Karen heard the whispers but ignored them. She was too far into the confrontation to back down now. Her pride would not let her. She felt she had to establish her authority, to show this passenger and everyone else who was in charge of this airplane. "You need to watch your tone with me," Karen said, pointing her finger at the man. "I am the flight attendant on this aircraft. That means I am responsible for everyone's safety, and I do not appreciate passengers who think the rules do not apply to them." The man stared at her for a long moment. His expression was hard to read. There was no anger in his eyes, but there was something else. Recognition, maybe. Sadness, perhaps. Like he had seen this all before and was tired of it. "I have followed every rule," he said quietly. "I boarded when my group was called. I helped another passenger. I apologized for an accident. I have been nothing but respectful to you, so I am not sure why you are treating me this way." His words were measured and careful. He was not raising his voice. He was not being rude. But Karen felt challenged anyway. She felt like he was questioning her authority. And after the day she had been through, after all the stress and frustration, she lost control. "You people always think you are special," Karen said. The words came out before she could stop them. "You people always think the rules do not apply to you. Well, not on my plane." The cabin went completely silent. Even the crying baby in the back seemed to pause. Everyone had heard what Karen just said. Everyone understood the meaning behind those words. "You people." It was not about the call button anymore. It had never really been about the call button. The man in seat 12A closed his eyes for a moment. He took a deep breath. When he opened his eyes again, his expression was sad but not surprised. He had heard words like this before. many times throughout his life. No matter how successful he became, no matter how much he accomplished, there would always be moments like this. The elderly woman next to him gasped. "How dare you speak to him that way?" she said to Karen. "This young man has been nothing but kind and helpful. You should be ashamed of yourself." Her husband stood up despite his bad back. He pointed at Karen. "I'm a veteran. I served this country for 30 years, and I know disrespect when I see it. You owe this man an apology right now." Other passengers started speaking up too. A woman in row 11 said, "This is discrimination. Someone needs to report this." A young man in row 13 said, "I am recording this. Everyone can see what is happening here." Karen's face turned red. She suddenly realized that she had made a terrible mistake. But instead of apologizing, instead of backing down, her pride made her double down. "Everyone needs to mind their own business," she shouted. "Sit down and prepare for departure. This does not concern any of you, but it did concern them." Every person on that plane was now a witness to something ugly and wrong, and they were not going to stay silent about it. The tension in the airplane was thick. You could almost feel it pressing down on everyone. People sat frozen in their seats watching what was happening in row 12. Some looked angry, some looked uncomfortable, some looked scared. But everyone was paying attention now. Karen stood in the aisle with her hands on her hips. Her face was still red from anger and embarrassment. She knew she had said something wrong. Deep down she knew she had crossed a line, but admitting that felt impossible. Her pride was too strong. So instead of apologizing, she tried to regain control of the situation. "I need everyone to return to their seats and fasten their seatbelts," she announced loudly. "We need to depart immediately. Anyone who continues to cause disruption will be removed from this flight." Her threat hung in the air, but it did not have the effect she wanted. Instead of making people back down, it made them angrier. They saw through her attempt to shift blame. They knew who was really causing the disruption. A woman sitting in row 8 stood up. She was in her early 30s with short brown hair and glasses. She wore casual clothes, jeans, and a sweater, but carried herself with confidence. Her name was Jennifer, and she worked as a journalist for a major news network. She had been trying to rest before the flight, but now she was wide awake and alert. Jennifer had witnessed the entire confrontation. She had heard every word Karen said, and her years of training as an investigative reporter told her this was serious. This was not just a flight attendant having a bad day. This was discrimination happening right in front of dozens of witnesses. "Excuse me," Jennifer called out in a clear, firm voice. "I think we need to address what just happened here." Karen spun around to face her. "Ma'am, I need you to sit down right now." "I will sit down in a moment," Jennifer said calmly. "But first, I think you owe that gentleman an apology. You spoke to him in a completely inappropriate way." "This is none of your business," Karen snapped. "Actually, it is my business," Jennifer replied. "It is everyone's business on this plane. You created a hostile environment. You singled out a passenger who did nothing wrong, and you used language that was clearly discriminatory." Other passengers began to nod and voice their agreement. The elderly woman in seat 12B spoke up again. "She is right. This man only helped me with my bag. He has been perfectly polite. But you have been rude and disrespectful to him from the start." The old man with the cane stood up again, wobbling slightly. He had to grab the seat in front of him for balance. "Young lady," he said to Karen, "I am 78 years old. I have seen a lot in my life. And what I just witnessed was wrong. Plain and simple. You need to apologize to this young man immediately." Karen felt the walls closing in around her. Too many people were against her now. She looked around desperately for support, but found none. Even the other passengers who had not spoken up were staring at her with disapproval. Some were shaking their heads. Others were whispering to each other. The man in seat 12A had remained quiet during all of this. He sat with his hands folded in his lap, looking straight ahead. His face showed no emotion. He was not angry or upset, at least not outwardly. He simply looked tired. Like this was something he had dealt with many times before, and he was exhausted by it. Jennifer noticed his reaction. She recognized that look. She had seen it before when interviewing people who had experienced discrimination. It was the look of someone who had learned to stay calm in the face of injustice, because getting angry would only make things worse. It was the look of dignity maintained under pressure. She pulled out her phone and opened her voice recorder app. She had already been recording since the confrontation started, but now she wanted to take notes too. Her journalist instincts were in full gear. This was a story. More importantly, this was evidence. A businessman in first class had gotten up and walked back to see what was causing the commotion. He was a large man in his 50s wearing an expensive watch and designer shoes. He looked at the scene with disgust, but not at Karen. He looked at the man in 12A. "What is all this noise about?" the businessman demanded. "Some of us are trying to rest. Can we please get this flight moving?" Jennifer turned to him. "We have a situation here that needs to be addressed first." "What situation?" the businessman said impatiently. "Just do what the flight attendant says and sit down. We are already delayed enough." "The situation is that this flight attendant just discriminated against a passenger," Jennifer said clearly. "She said, 'you people' to him. Everyone heard it." The businessman looked at the man in 12A and shrugged. "Maybe he did something to deserve it. These things do not happen for no reason." Several passengers gasped at this comment. Jennifer could not believe what she just heard. "Are you serious right now?" she asked. "You are actually defending what she said?" "I am just saying we do not know the whole story," the businessman said. "And I want to get to Atlanta on time, so everyone should just sit down and be quiet." "I know the whole story," the elderly veteran said angrily. He pointed his cane at the businessman. "I was sitting right here. This young man helped my wife. He did nothing wrong. Zero. Nothing. And this flight attendant attacked him for no reason except how he looks." "Oh, please," the businessman said dismissively. "Everyone always plays the victim these days." This comment sparked even more outrage. Multiple passengers started talking at once. Some defended the man in 12A. Some criticized Karen. A few people started arguing with the businessman from first class. The noise level rose dramatically. The situation was spiraling out of control. Through all of this chaos, the man in seat 12A remained silent. He looked out the window at the tarmac. He seemed to be somewhere else in his mind, far away from the conflict happening around him. But Jennifer could see his jaw was clenched. She could see his hands gripping the armrests a little too tightly. He was not as calm as he appeared. Karen realized she had completely lost control of her cabin. This was a disaster. The flight was now seriously delayed. Passengers were angry and divided, and she was at the center of it all. She needed help. She needed backup. She reached for her radio to call for a supervisor or security. But before she could press the button, a door at the front of the plane opened. Everyone turned to look. The cockpit door swung open and a man in a pilot's uniform stepped out. He was tall and gray-haired, probably in his late 50s. His uniform was crisp and professional. He had captain's stripes on his shoulders. His face was serious and concerned. "What is going on out here?" he asked in a deep, authoritative voice. I can hear shouting all the way in the cockpit. Karen felt a small sense of relief. Finally, someone with authority to back her up. "Captain Sullivan," she said quickly. "We have a disruptive passenger situation. I was just about to call for assistance." Captain Sullivan walked down the aisle toward row 12. His eyes scanned the cabin, taking in everything. He saw the elderly couple looking upset. He saw Jennifer holding her phone. He saw other passengers with angry and uncomfortable expressions. And he saw the man in seat 12A, sitting quietly by the window. "Someone explain to me what happened," the captain said. "One person at a time, please." Everyone started talking at once. The captain held up his hand. "One at a time," he repeated firmly. He pointed to the elderly veteran. "Sir, you first. What happened?" The old man explained everything clearly and carefully. He told the captain how the man in 12A had helped his wife, how the call button was pressed by accident, how Karen had confronted him aggressively, and most importantly how Karen had said, "You people," in a way that everyone understood was discriminatory. As the veteran spoke, Captain Sullivan's expression grew more serious. He glanced at Karen, who looked down at the floor. Then he looked at the man in 12A who met his eyes calmly. Jennifer spoke up next. "Captain, I am a journalist. I recorded the entire interaction. This was clear discrimination. Your flight attendant created a hostile environment for this passenger without any justification." "That is not true," Karen protested weakly. "I was just trying to maintain order and safety." "By saying, 'you people'?" Jennifer challenged. "By singling him out when he was helping another passenger? That was about safety?" The captain held up his hand again. "Everyone please calm down." He turned to Karen. "Did you say 'you people' to this passenger?" Karen hesitated. She wanted to deny it. But too many people had heard her. The lie would not work. I might have said something like that. But I did not mean it the way it sounds." "How did you mean it then?" Captain Sullivan asked. Karen had no good answer. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. She could feel dozens of eyes staring at her, judging her, waiting for her to explain the unexplainable. The captain sighed deeply. This was a serious problem. He turned to the man in seat 12A. "Sir, I apologize for this situation. Would you mind stepping into the galley with me for a moment? I would like to speak with you privately." The man nodded silently and stood up. As he stepped into the aisle, Captain Sullivan got a better look at him. Something about the man seemed familiar. The captain could not quite place it. But there was something about his bearing, his confidence, the quality of his clothes, that made the captain think this was not an ordinary passenger. They walked together toward the front galley. The entire cabin watched them go. Jennifer kept her phone ready, recording everything. The forward galley was small and cramped. It was barely big enough for two people to stand comfortably. Captain Sullivan closed the curtain behind them to give them some privacy from the watching passengers. The small space smelled like coffee and airplane cleaning products. Through the thin curtain, they could still hear the murmur of voices from the cabin. The captain looked at the man carefully. Up close, he could see more details. The suit was not just expensive, it was custom-made. The watch on his wrist was a limited edition piece that probably cost more than most people's cars. The briefcase, even though simple-looking, had the subtle markings of a luxury brand. But more than the material things, there was something else. The man carried himself with a quiet authority that spoke of success and power. "Sir, I want to apologize again for what happened out there," Captain Sullivan said sincerely. "That was completely unacceptable behavior from my crew member. I take full responsibility." The man shook his head slightly. "Captain, you were not the one who said those things. You do not need to apologize for someone else's actions." "But she is part of my crew," the captain insisted. "What happens on this aircraft is my responsibility. And what she said to you was wrong on every level." There was a pause. The man looked tired. Not physically tired, but emotionally exhausted, like he had fought this same battle too many times before. "Can I ask you something?" Captain Sullivan said. "And please be honest with me. Do you want to continue on this flight? Because I would completely understand if you wanted to get off and take another flight. I can make arrangements. I can make sure you are taken care of." The man smiled sadly. "Captain, if I got off every plane where someone treated me badly because of how I look, I would never get anywhere. This is not new to me. I have dealt with this my whole life." "That does not make it right," the captain said firmly. "No, it does not," the man agreed. "But getting off this plane and taking another flight does not fix the problem. The problem is not me. The problem is people like your flight attendant who make assumptions about people based on their skin color." Captain Sullivan nodded slowly. He felt ashamed, even though he personally had done nothing wrong. He felt ashamed for his airline, for his industry, for the society that allowed this to keep happening. "May I ask your name, sir?" the captain said. "I need to file a report about this incident." The man hesitated. "I prefer to keep a low profile when I travel. That is actually why I fly economy sometimes. It helps me stay connected to regular people and remember where I came from." Something clicked in Captain Sullivan's mind. The expensive but understated clothing, the preference for economy class despite obvious wealth, the calm dignity under pressure. And then he saw it. Clipped to the man's briefcase was a small platinum card. It was the kind of card the airline only gave to a handful of people in the world. Board members, major shareholders, VIP executives. The captain's eyes widened. "Sir, are you—" Are you David Richardson? The man's expression did not change much, but something in his eyes confirmed it. I prefer not to make a big deal about who I am. Captain Sullivan felt his heart drop into his stomach. David Richardson, one of the most successful technology entrepreneurs in the country, a self-made billionaire who had built his company from nothing. A man who was regularly featured in business magazines and news programs. A major shareholder in the airline. And possibly the most important passenger on the plane. More than that, David Richardson was known for his philanthropy. His foundation had provided college scholarships to thousands of underprivileged students. He had donated millions to hospitals, schools, and community programs. He was respected and admired by millions of people, and Karen had just humiliated him in front of a plane full of passengers. "Mr. Richardson," the captain said, his voice shaking slightly, "I am so sorry. This is absolutely mortifying. I do not even know what to say. Please do not treat me differently now that you know who I am," Richardson said quietly. "That is exactly the problem. I should not need to be a billionaire or a shareholder for people to treat me with basic respect and dignity. Every passenger on this plane deserves to be treated well, regardless of who they are or what they look like." "You are absolutely right," Captain Sullivan agreed. "But this situation is particularly serious. You are not just any passenger. You are a major shareholder in this airline. There will be serious consequences for this," Richardson sighed. "Captain, I do not want anyone to lose their job over this. I really do not. But I also cannot let this go. Because if this happened to me, someone with resources and influence, imagine how often it happens to regular people who have no power to fight back. People who cannot afford lawyers. People who are afraid to speak up because they might lose their jobs or get in trouble." The captain understood. This was bigger than one incident on one flight. This was about systemic problems. This was about the kind of casual discrimination that happened every day in airports, on planes, in hotels, in stores, and in 1,000 other places. "What do you want me to do?" Captain Sullivan asked. "I will support whatever decision you make." Richardson thought for a moment. "I want to address the passengers. I want them to understand that this is not just about me. I want them to see how discrimination works and why it is everyone's responsibility to speak up when they see it happening." "Of course," the captain agreed. "Whatever you need." They walked back out into the cabin together. Every eye turned to watch them. The plane was completely silent except for the hum of the air conditioning. Jennifer had her phone ready, still recording. Karen stood near the front, her face pale and worried. Captain Sullivan stood in the aisle where everyone could see him. His voice carried the full weight of his authority. "Ladies and gentlemen, I need to address what happened here today. First, I want to say that what you witnessed was completely unacceptable. There is no excuse for any member of my crew to speak to a passenger the way our flight attendant spoke to this gentleman." He gestured to Richardson, who stood beside him. This passenger did absolutely nothing wrong. He helped another passenger with a bag. He accidentally pressed a call button. He apologized immediately. And despite that, he was treated with disrespect and subjected to discriminatory language. Karen shifted uncomfortably. She stared at the floor, unable to meet anyone's eyes. "I take full responsibility for my crew's actions," the captain continued. "And I promise you that this incident will be thoroughly investigated. But more importantly, I want this to be a learning moment for all of us." He turned to Richardson. "Sir, would you like to say anything?" Richardson stepped forward slightly. He looked around at all the passengers watching him. Some looked curious. Some looked sympathetic. Some looked uncomfortable. The businessman from first class looked annoyed, like this was all a waste of his time. "Thank you, Captain," Richardson began. His voice was calm and clear. "I appreciate your words and your support. But I want to say something to everyone here. This is not really about me personally. Yes, what happened was hurtful and frustrating, but I have resources. I have influence. I have the ability to stand up for myself." He paused and looked around the cabin again. "What worries me is all the people this happens to who do not have those resources. The single mother flying with her kids who gets treated rudely because of her accent. The young man who gets pulled aside for extra security screening because of how he looks. The elderly immigrant who gets spoken to slowly and loudly like they are stupid. These things happen every single day, and most of the time no one says anything. No one stands up. No one records it on their phone." Jennifer felt a lump in her throat. She knew he was right. She had seen it herself many times, but had not always spoken up. So I want to thank everyone who did speak up today, Richardson continued. The elderly couple in row 12 who defended me. The journalist who called out what was happening. All of you who refused to stay silent. That is what needs to happen every time, because discrimination only continues when good people say nothing. Several passengers nodded. Some wiped their eyes. Even some of the people who had been uncomfortable or unsure earlier seemed moved by his words. I do not want anyone to lose their job over this, Richardson said, glancing at Karen. I truly do not. But I do want real change. I want training programs. I want accountability systems. I want this airline to become a leader in fighting discrimination, not just in responding to it after it happens. Karen finally looked up. Tears were running down her face. She looked at Richardson with an expression of shame and regret. I am so sorry, she whispered. I was wrong. I was so wrong. There is no excuse for how I spoke to you. Richardson looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded slightly. I accept your apology. But you need to understand why what you said was so harmful. You need to do the work to examine your own biases and prejudices. We all have them. But we have to be willing to confront them and change. The captain spoke up again. Mr. Richardson is right. And I promise that this airline will do better. Starting today, we will implement comprehensive training programs for all crew members. We will establish clear protocols for handling discrimination complaints, and we will create an oversight committee to ensure these changes actually happen. He looked at Karen. As for you, you will be removed from this flight immediately. There will be a full investigation, and you will be required to complete extensive training before you return to duty. Do you understand? Karen nodded, still crying. Yes, sir. I understand, and I truly am sorry. The announcement that Karen would be removed from the flight caused mixed reactions throughout the cabin. Some passengers nodded with satisfaction, feeling that justice was being served. Others looked uncomfortable, perhaps feeling sympathy for Karen despite what she had done. A few people still seemed confused about why this was such a big deal. The businessman from first class spoke up again.
Captain, with all due respect, is all of this really necessary?
We are now even more delayed than before. Can we please just move on and get this flight in the air? Captain Sullivan turned to face him. His expression was stern. Sir, this is absolutely necessary. What happened here today is serious, and we will not sweep it under the rug just to save time. But she apologized, the businessman protested. Everyone makes mistakes. This seems like an overreaction. Richardson stepped forward. May I ask you a question, sir? The businessman looked surprised to be addressed directly. I suppose so. Have you ever been followed around a store because someone assumed you were going to steal something? Richardson asked calmly. No, the businessman said, confused by the question. Have you ever been pulled over by police for no clear reason? Multiple times, just driving through your own neighborhood? No. Have you ever had someone clutch their purse tighter when you got on an elevator? Or had people assume you were the janitor instead of the CEO? Or been told you only got your job because of quotas and diversity requirements, not because of your actual skills and accomplishments? The businessman shifted uncomfortably. No, I have not experienced those things. I have, Richardson said quietly. I have experienced all of those things and more. Many times. Throughout my entire life. And so have millions of other people who look like me. So when someone in a position of authority singles me out and says you people in that particular tone, it is not just one isolated incident. It is part of a pattern that has followed me my entire life. The cabin was silent. People listened carefully to every word. That is why this is not an overreaction, Richardson continued. That is why we cannot just brush it off and move on. Because if we do, it will keep happening. To me, to other people. Over and over again. The businessman looked down at his hands. He seemed to be thinking about what Richardson had said. I never thought about it like that, he admitted quietly. I apologize for being insensitive. Jennifer, the journalist, spoke up from her seat. This is exactly the kind of conversation we need to be having. Most people who have not experienced discrimination do not understand how exhausting it is, how it builds up over time, how even small incidents can feel crushing when they happen over and over. An Asian woman in row 15 raised her hand slightly. I want to say something too, if that is okay. Please, Captain Sullivan encouraged her. I am a doctor, the woman said. I have worked in emergency rooms for 15 years, and I cannot tell you how many times patients have refused to let me treat them, because they assumed I was a nurse or a translator. or how many times colleagues have been surprised that I speak perfect English, even though I was born in California. These things happen constantly. A Hispanic man in row 20 added his voice. I am a lawyer, and I still get asked to show identification in my own office building, because security assumes I am part of the cleaning crew. It happens at least once a month. More passengers began sharing their own experiences. A Muslim woman talked about being asked to get off a plane because another passenger felt uncomfortable. A man with a thick accent described being treated rudely at restaurants and hotels. An older black woman shared a story about being followed by store security while shopping with her grandchildren. As people told their stories, something shifted in the cabin. The passengers who had not understood why this was such a big deal began to get it. They saw the pattern. They understood that this was not just about one flight attendant having a bad day. This was about something much bigger and more painful. The businessman who had complained about the delay raised his hand. I owe everyone here an apology. Especially you, sir, he said, looking at Richardson. I was being selfish and ignorant. I see now why this matters so much. Richardson nodded graciously. Thank you for listening and being willing to learn. That is all any of us can ask. Captain Sullivan spoke again. I think what we are seeing here is the power of speaking up and having these difficult conversations. It is uncomfortable. It takes time, but it is necessary. Karen, who had been standing quietly near the front, spoke through her tears. I want to say something to everyone here. I am ashamed of myself. I let my stress and frustration turn into cruelty, and I hurt someone who did not deserve it. But I also need to be honest and admit that this was not just about stress. I have biases and prejudices that I have never properly examined, and I need to work on that. I need to do better. Her voice broke as she continued. I'm not a bad person. At least I do not want to be. But I did a bad thing today, and I am going to learn from this. I promise I will do the work to change. Several passengers seemed moved by her words. Richardson looked at her with an expression that was hard to read. There was still hurt there, but also perhaps a glimmer of forgiveness or at least understanding. Change is hard, Richardson said to her directly. It requires looking at yourself honestly, which is painful. But I believe people can change if they really want to. I hope you will do that work. I will, Karen promised. I absolutely will. The elderly woman from seat 12B, who had been helped by Richardson at the start of all this, stood up slowly. Her husband helped steady her. I want to say something too. I am 75 years old. I grew up in a time when discrimination was even more open and accepted than it is now. I have seen a lot of progress in my lifetime, but I have also seen how much further we still need to go. She looked around at the younger passengers. You young people give me hope, because you are not willing to stay silent when you see injustice. You speak up. You record things on your phones. You demand accountability. That is how real change happens. Her husband added, I fought in Vietnam. I fought for this country. And one thing I learned is that freedom and justice are not just words. They are things we have to actively defend and fight for every single day, in big ways and small ways. The mood in the cabin had completely transformed. What had started as an ugly confrontation had turned into a powerful teaching moment. People who had been strangers an hour ago now felt connected by this shared experience. Jennifer put down her phone, which had been recording everything. I am going to write about this, she announced. Not to shame anyone or go viral, but to start a real conversation. Because this is the kind of thing that needs to be talked about openly. Captain Sullivan nodded. I think that is a good idea. Sunlight is the best disinfectant, as they say. We cannot fix problems we refuse to acknowledge. He turned to address everyone one more time. Ladies and gentlemen, I know this has been a difficult and unusual situation. We are going to be significantly delayed. If any of you wish to take a different flight, we will make arrangements for you at no charge. But I hope you will all stay, because I think we have all learned something valuable today. No one got up to leave. Despite the delay, despite the tension, despite the discomfort, everyone seemed to feel that this was important, that they needed to see it through. A young black teenager in row 18 raised his hand. He looked nervous but determined. I just want to say thank you to Mr. Richardson and to everyone who spoke up. I am only 15, and I have already experienced stuff like this. It made me feel really good to see adults standing up and defending someone. It gives me hope that things can get better. His mother, sitting next to him, put her arm around him. Tears streamed down her face. As a mother, it breaks my heart that my son has to worry about these things. But I am grateful he got to witness this today, to see that there are good people who will stand up for what is right. Richardson walked over to the teenager. He leaned down so they could talk at eye level. "Young man, what is your name?" "Jason," the boy answered. "Jason, I want you to remember something. You are not defined by how other people treat you. You are defined by how you respond to it. Stay strong, work hard, and never let anyone make you feel like you are less than you are." The boy nodded, trying not to cry. "Thank you, sir. That means a lot." Richardson reached into his briefcase and pulled out a business card. "When you are ready to apply to college, you contact me. I have a foundation that helps students like you. Promise me you will reach out." "I promise," Jason said, taking the card carefully like it was made of gold. The interaction touched everyone watching. This was not just about words and policies. This was about real people and real lives. About a teenager who would remember this moment forever. About a man who used his success to lift up others. About a community coming together to stand against injustice. Captain Sullivan wiped his own eyes. In 30 years of flying, he had never experienced anything like this. "Okay," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Let us get this flight ready. We have kept you all long enough." Karen gathered her things slowly. Her hands shook as she picked up her bag and her jacket. Every movement felt heavy with shame and regret. The other flight attendants watched her with mixed expressions. Some looked sympathetic. Others looked disappointed or angry. One of them, a younger woman named Maria, stepped forward to help her. "Come on," Maria said gently, taking Karen's arm. "Let me walk you out." As they moved toward the front of the plane, Karen stopped near row 12. She looked at Richardson one more time. "I really am sorry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I will never forget this. And I will do better. I promise." Richardson met her eyes. "I believe you can change. But you have to want it. You have to do the hard work of looking at your own prejudices and where they come from. It will not be easy, but it is necessary." Karen nodded, tears still flowing down her cheeks. Then she and Maria left the plane. The jetway door closed behind them with a soft thud. A new flight attendant came aboard to replace Karen. His name was Thomas, and he was in his mid-30s with a warm smile. He introduced himself to the passengers and apologized for the delay and the difficult situation. "We are going to make sure the rest of this flight is as smooth and pleasant as possible," he promised. The atmosphere in the cabin slowly began to shift from tense to something else, something almost hopeful. Strangers who had witnessed this event together began talking to each other, sharing phone numbers, exchanging social media handles, making connections that went beyond just being passengers on the same flight. The elderly couple in row 12 introduced themselves properly to Richardson. Their names were Harold and Dorothy Miller. They had been married for 52 years. They were flying to Atlanta to visit their new great-grandchild. "You are a remarkable young man," Dorothy said to Richardson. "The way you handled that situation with such grace and dignity. Your parents must be very proud of you." Richardson smiled softly. "My mother passed away 10 years ago. But yes, she taught me to always take the high road, even when it is difficult. Especially when it is difficult." "She raised you well," Harold said, shaking Richardson's hand firmly. "And that thing you did for that young boy back there, giving him your card, offering to help with college, that was really something special." "I was a kid like Jason once," Richardson said. "I grew up poor in South Chicago. My mother cleaned houses to put food on the table. I only made it because people gave me chances, scholarships, mentors, people who believed in me when I did not believe in myself. So now, I try to do the same for others." Jennifer, the journalist, came over to introduce herself properly. "Mr. Richardson, I am Jennifer Hartley. I work for CNN. I would love to interview you about what happened today if you would be willing." "I will think about it," Richardson said. "But if I do an interview, I want to make sure it focuses on the bigger issues, not just on me personally. Can you do that?" "Absolutely," Jennifer promised. "This is an important story that needs to be told the right way, and I think you have an important message that people need to hear." She handed him her business card. Call me when you are ready. No pressure. But I think together we could help a lot of people understand these issues better. Richardson took her card and put it in his wallet. Thank you for speaking up back there. You did not have to get involved, but you did anyway. That took courage. Jennifer shook her head. It did not take courage. It just took basic human decency, which should not be courageous, but sadly sometimes it is. The businessman from first class approached nervously. He looked embarrassed, but determined. Mr. Richardson, I wanted to apologize again in person. I was completely out of line earlier. I said ignorant things and I am sorry. Richardson extended his hand. Apology accepted, and I appreciate you being willing to listen and learn. That is more than many people would do. Can I ask you something? The businessman said. How do you stay so calm? If someone had spoken to me the way that flight attendant spoke to you, I would have lost my temper immediately. Richardson sighed. Believe me, I wanted to lose my temper. But here is what I have learned over the years. When you are black in America, people are always watching you, always judging you. If I had gotten angry, if I had raised my voice, suddenly I would have been the problem. I would have been the angry black man making a scene. And everything would have been turned around on me. The businessman looked troubled. That does not seem fair. It is not fair, Richardson agreed. But it is reality. So you learn to stay calm. You learn to be twice as good and twice as professional just to be treated as equal. It is exhausting, but it is survival. Jason, the teenage boy, came over with his mother. He still held Richardson's business card carefully in his hand. Mr. Richardson, I wanted to thank you again, and I wanted to show you something. He pulled out his phone and showed Richardson his grades. Straight A's in all honors classes. He was on the debate team and the math club. He volunteered at a community center on weekends. This is impressive, Jason, Richardson said, genuinely pleased. You are doing everything right. Keep it up, and you are going to have a bright future. He works so hard, Jason's mother said proudly. Even when things are difficult, even when he faces discrimination and has to work twice as hard as his white classmates to get the same recognition. I know it is hard, Richardson said to Jason, but do not let it make you bitter. Use it as fuel. Let it motivate you to be great. And then when you achieve success, remember to reach back and help the next generation, just like I am trying to help you. I will, Jason promised. I definitely will. Captain Sullivan returned from the cockpit after completing the final pre-flight checks. He had made a difficult phone call to the airline headquarters during the delay. He had reported the incident fully and honestly. He had also made some strong recommendations about policy changes and training programs. Mr. Richardson, the captain said, I just spoke with our CEO. He wants to meet with you as soon as possible. He is horrified by what happened and wants to make real changes. Would you be willing to meet with him? Yes, Richardson said. But I want to be involved in creating the solutions, not just complaining about the problems. If your airline is serious about change, I will help. But it has to be real change, not just public relations. I understand, Captain Sullivan said. And I agree completely. Cosmetic changes are not enough. We need structural reform. He looked around at all the passengers watching this conversation, and I think we need to hear from passengers too. If anyone here wants to submit feedback or suggestions about how we can do better, please contact our customer service department. Mention this flight number. I promise your voices will be heard. Several passengers pulled out their phones to make notes of the flight number. They wanted to be part of the solution too. Thomas, the new flight attendant, came on the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we are finally ready for departure. I know this has been a long and emotional morning for everyone. Thank you for your patience and understanding. Please make sure your seatbelts are fastened and your seats are in the upright position. People settled back into their seats. The normal sounds of a flight preparing for departure filled the cabin. The clicking of seatbelts, the whoosh of air vents, the ding of the seatbelt sign turning on. But something was different now. The passengers were not strangers anymore. They had shared an experience that bonded them together. They had witnessed injustice and seen people stand up against it. They had learned difficult truths about the world and about themselves. As the plane pushed back from the gate, Richardson looked out the window again. The morning sun was higher in the sky now. The tarmac was busy with activity, planes taking off and landing. Luggage trucks rushing back and forth, the endless motion of modern travel. He thought about his mother who had worked so hard to give him opportunities. She had scrubbed floors and cleaned toilets so he could go to a good school. She had faced discrimination and disrespect every day of her working life, but she had never let it break her spirit. She had taught him to be strong, to be proud, to never accept being treated as less than. "I hope I made you proud today, Mama," he whispered to himself. Dorothy, sitting next to him, heard him. She reached over and patted his hand. "She is proud of you, dear, I am sure of it. What you did today, how you handled yourself, the way you turned a bad situation into a teaching moment. That was remarkable." "Thank you," Richardson said. "But honestly, I am just tired. Tired of having to be remarkable just to be treated with basic respect. I just want to live my life without constantly having to prove my worth to people." "I know, dear," Dorothy said softly. "I know. But you are making things better for that young boy, Jason, and others like him. That is not nothing. That is everything." The plane began to taxi toward the runway. Captain Sullivan's voice came over the speaker. "Flight attendants, prepare for takeoff." As the engines powered up and the plane raced down the runway, lifting off into the clear blue sky, everyone on board carried with them the weight and the hope of what had happened. They had seen the worst of humanity in Karen's discrimination. But they had also seen the best of humanity in how people came together to stand against it, and sometimes that is all you can ask for. That when injustice happens, people refuse to stay silent. That when someone is hurt, others stand up to defend them. That hope survives even in difficult moments. The flight to Atlanta took about 2 hours. For most passengers, it felt like the quickest flight they had ever been on. People talked quietly with each other, continuing conversations that had started during the crisis. Some read or worked. Others slept. But everyone was thinking about what had happened. Richardson tried to focus on work, but his mind kept wandering. He answered a few emails. He reviewed some documents for his meeting in Atlanta. But mostly he stared out the window at the clouds below and thought about his life. About all the times he had faced discrimination. About all the battles he had fought. About whether things were really getting better or if they just looked different. When the plane began its descent into Atlanta, Captain Sullivan made one final announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, as we prepare to land, I want to thank you all again for your patience today. What happened on this flight was unfortunate, but I believe we all learned something valuable. I know I did. Safe travels to everyone, and thank you for flying with us." As the plane touched down smoothly on the runway, passengers began pulling out their phones and turning them back on. Within minutes, messages and notifications started flooding in. Several passengers had texted friends and family about what had happened. Word was already spreading. Jennifer, the journalist, had sent the recording and her notes to her producer. Her phone rang almost immediately. "Jennifer, this is incredible," her producer said excitedly. "This is exactly the kind of story we need to tell. When can we air it?" "I want to do it right," Jennifer said. "I want to interview Mr. Richardson properly. I want to talk to some of the other passengers. I want to explore the bigger issues, not just focus on the drama." "Absolutely," her producer agreed. "Take your time and do it right. This could be really important." The plane pulled up to the gate. The seatbelt sign turned off with its familiar ding. People stood up and began gathering their belongings from the overhead bins. But unlike most flights, people were not rushing. They were taking their time, still talking to each other. Harold, the elderly veteran, stood up slowly with his cane. He turned to Richardson and saluted him. "You served your country well today, young man. Not with a weapon, but with dignity and grace. That is a different kind of courage, and it is just as important." Richardson stood and shook his hand firmly. "Thank you, sir. That means a great deal coming from someone who served in uniform." Dorothy gave Richardson a long hug. "You take care of yourself, dear. The world needs more people like you." As passengers began filing off the plane, many stopped to shake Richardson's hand or thank him. The businessman from first class handed him a business card. "If you ever need anything, please call me. And I am going to be more aware from now on, I promise." Jason and his mother were among the last to leave. The boy looked at Richardson with something close to worship in his eyes. "I am never going to forget today," Jason said. "Never. You showed me how to stand up for myself with class and dignity. That is something I can use for the rest of my life." "You already have everything you need inside you, Jason," Richardson said. "You just needed to see it in action. Now go out there and be great, and do not forget to contact my foundation when the time comes." "I would not dream of it," Jason said, clutching the business card like treasure. When most of the passengers had left, Captain Sullivan came out from the cockpit. He had taken off his jacket and looked tired but satisfied. "Mr. Richardson, may I walk with you for a moment?" "Of course," Richardson said. They walked together through the jetway and into the terminal. The Atlanta airport was bustling with travelers rushing to their gates. Announcements echoed through the corridors. The smell of airport food filled the air. Everything was normal and busy and loud, but both men felt changed by what had happened. "I have been flying for 30 years, Captain Sullivan said. I have dealt with all kinds of situations. Medical emergencies, mechanical problems, difficult passengers, bad weather, but I have never experienced anything like today." "I hope that is a good thing," Richardson said with a slight smile. "It is," the captain confirmed, "because it opened my eyes to things I should have been paying attention to all along. I have probably had crew members behave inappropriately before and I just did not see it. Or I saw it and did not recognize how serious it was. That needs to change." "The fact that you recognize that is a good first step," Richardson said. "Most people never even get that far." They stopped at a quiet corner of the terminal. Captain Sullivan pulled out his phone. "I want to give you my personal number. Not my work number. My personal cell. Because I want to stay in touch with you as we work through these changes at the airline. I want your input. I want your guidance. And honestly, I just want to learn from you." Richardson took down the number. "I appreciate that, Captain. And I will help however I can. But remember, real change takes time. It is not just one training session or one policy update. It is an ongoing commitment." "I understand," Captain Sullivan said, "and I am committed for the long haul." They shook hands and the captain headed back to the plane to complete his post-flight paperwork. Richardson continued through the terminal toward baggage claim. His mind was already spinning with ideas for how to make meaningful changes at the airline. His phone buzzed with a text message. It was from the airline's CEO. "Mr. Richardson, I heard about the incident on your flight. I am horrified and embarrassed. Can we meet tomorrow morning? I want to hear your thoughts on how we can do better. Please give me the chance to make this right." Richardson typed back a quick reply. "Tomorrow at 9. Come prepared to make real commitments, not just promises." As he waited for his luggage, Jennifer the journalist found him. "Mr. Richardson, I know you are probably exhausted, but would you be willing to do a brief interview right now while everything is fresh? We can do a longer, more in-depth piece later, but I think it is important to get your immediate thoughts on record." Richardson hesitated. He was tired. He had a meeting to prepare for. He just wanted to go to his hotel and rest. But he thought about Jason and all the other young people who needed to hear this message. He thought about his mother and how she had never had a platform to tell her story. "Okay," he agreed. "Let us do it." They found a quiet spot near a window overlooking the runway. Jennifer set up her phone to record. She asked him thoughtful questions, not trying to sensationalize what had happened, but trying to understand the deeper meaning of it. "What do you want people to take away from this?" she asked him. Richardson thought carefully before answering. "I want people to understand that discrimination is not always obvious. It is not always white hoods and burning crosses. Sometimes it is a flight attendant who lets her stress and unconscious bias turn into cruel words. Sometimes it is a security guard who follows someone around a store. Sometimes it is a teacher who calls on certain students less often than others. It is 1,000 small cuts that add up to a deep wound. And what can people do about it?" Jennifer asked. "Speak up," Richardson said firmly. "When you see something wrong, say something. Do not wait for someone else to do it. Do not assume it is not your business. Because silence is how discrimination continues. Silence is how injustice survives." He paused, then continued. "But also, do the work on yourself. Examine your own biases. Ask yourself hard questions about your assumptions and prejudices. We all have them. Every single one of us. The question is whether we are willing to confront them and change." The interview lasted about 20 minutes. When it was done, Jennifer thanked him profusely. "This is going to help a lot of people," she promised. "I will make sure your message gets heard." Richardson finally collected his luggage and headed outside to find a taxi. The hot Georgia sun hit him as he walked out of the air-conditioned terminal. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the day settling on his shoulders. His taxi driver was a middle-aged black man with kind eyes. As they pulled away from the airport, the driver looked at Richardson in the rearview mirror. "You okay, brother? You look like you have been through something today." Richardson smiled tiredly. "It has been quite a morning. But I am okay. More than okay, actually." "Well, wherever you are headed, I will get you there safely," the driver said. As they drove through Atlanta's busy streets, Richardson's phone kept buzzing with messages. Friends who had heard about the incident.
Colleagues offering support.
Reporters requesting interviews. And messages from ordinary people thanking him for how he handled the situation. One message stood out. It was from an email address he did not recognize. The message was from Karen, the flight attendant. She had somehow tracked down his contact information. "Mr. Richardson," she wrote, "I know I already apologized in person, but I needed to write to you as well. I have spent the day thinking about what I did and why I did it. I have been forced to confront some ugly truths about myself. I grew up in a small town where everyone looked like me. I never examined my prejudices because I never had to. But that is no excuse. I hurt you and I am deeply sorry. I am going to do the work to change. I am going to go to therapy. I am going to take classes on unconscious bias. I am going to become a better person. Thank you for handling the situation with such grace. You showed me what dignity looks like." Richardson read the message twice. He thought about responding immediately but decided to wait. He wanted to give her words time to sink in. He wanted to see if her commitment to change was real or just something she said in the moment. By the time he reached his hotel, Richardson was exhausted. He checked in and went straight to his room. It was a nice suite with a view of downtown Atlanta. He threw his bag on the bed and loosened his tie. Then he walked to the window and looked out at the city. Somewhere out there was Jason, the teenage boy, probably telling his friends about what happened. Somewhere out there was Karen, hopefully beginning the difficult work of examining her prejudices. Somewhere out there were all the passengers from that flight, changed in small or large ways by what they had witnessed. And somewhere in the sky, more planes were flying with more passengers who might face similar situations. Would people speak up for them? Would justice be served? Would anything really change? Richardson did not have all the answers, but he knew one thing for certain. He would keep fighting. He would keep using his platform and his resources to push for change. He would keep helping young people like Jason achieve their dreams. He would keep holding institutions accountable, because that is what his mother had taught him. That is what his own struggles had taught him. That you do not give up. You do not stay silent. You keep fighting for what is right even when it is hard, especially when it is hard. 3 months later, the airline had implemented sweeping changes. All crew members underwent comprehensive training on unconscious bias and discrimination. A new oversight committee, which Richardson advised, reviewed complaints and made policy recommendations. The airline created a scholarship program for underprivileged students interested in aviation careers. Jennifer's story about the incident aired on national television. It sparked important conversations across the country about discrimination in travel and service industries. The video of the confrontation went viral, but the focus remained on the larger issues rather than just the drama. Karen completed her training and returned to work. She became an advocate for change within the company, sharing her story as a cautionary tale and encouraging others to examine their own biases. She would never forget what happened on that flight, and she worked every day to be better. Jason received a full scholarship from Richardson's foundation to attend a prestigious university. He went on to study engineering and never forgot the lesson he learned that day about dignity and standing up for what is right. And Richardson continued his work, knowing that the fight for equality and justice was far from over, but also knowing that change was possible when people refused to stay silent, when they stood up for each other, when they demanded better. The incident on Flight 237 became more than just a story about one bad interaction. It became a catalyst for meaningful change. It became a reminder that every person has the power to make a difference, that speaking up matters, that standing together against injustice can create ripples that spread far beyond a single moment. And sometimes, that is exactly what the world needs. Not perfection, but progress. Not silence, but voices raised in defense of dignity and humanity. Not quick fixes, but lasting commitment to doing better. The plane had been crowded that morning. The flight attendant had yelled, and in that difficult moment something important had happened. People had chosen to care. They had chosen to speak. They had chosen to change, and that made all the difference.